Okay, so I had chapter 4, which is conducting, practicing, and deepening lessons. And the chapter starts off with talking about two different types of knowledge. So that would be procedural knowledge and declarative knowledge. And procedural knowledge includes skills, strategies, and processes, and it also gives examples and strategies. And declarative knowledge involves information and comes in a variety of forms, and it also involves knowledge of terminology. So, for example, in a math class, when you're talking about terminology, you're thinking of when you're speaking to the students and you're teaching them, instead of saying we're going to borrow from the one, we would say we're going to regroup because that is the correct terminology. And instead of we're going to take away, we're going to remove from said number. It also discusses in the beginning important elements that are effective for practicing and deepening lesson plans. So it starts off with element 9, which is using structured practice sessions. And a quote from the book was that students need to practice skills, strategies, and processes, not details, generalizations, principles, and concepts. So when it says that students need to practice skills, strategies, and processes, it's referring to procedural knowledge. And it says that they shouldn't discuss details, generalizations, principles, and concepts, which is referring to declarative knowledge. So element 9 is mostly focusing on procedural knowledge. It also talks about how there are 3 stages of procedural knowledge processes: cognitive, associative, and autonomous. Cognitive deals with the learning side. So when you first introduce a topic and the students are just beginning to learn about it and take it all in. And associative, which would be the second process, is the students beginning to try it out and get a feel for it. And then 3, autonomous, is the fine-tuning their ability to do it. So that's when they're learning how to do it, they're getting better at it, and they're just fixing up all those little tweaks in what they're doing. And then it talks about element 10, which is examining similarities and differences. And that's when you're talking about how things are alike and not alike. And it talked about how seeing those similarities and differences can help students to understand the concept better. And I kind of connected this with whenever you're teaching for a concept for the first time, you can kind of give examples and non-examples, because then they can see both sides of the situation. And so they can kind of just differentiate between those two, and it helps them to understand it better. And also element 10 applies to both the procedural and declarative knowledge. And then in element 11, it discusses examining errors and reasoning. So it helps students deepen their understanding by having them think about their own reasoning. So it basically just talked about how when you're having students learn a new concept, you're trying to get them to think about their own reasoning on the concept. And so I remember when I was in elementary school, we would have to write our own definitions. And so we would learn the concept, but then we would have to explain it in our own way. And I think that just kind of helped to help the students understand it more, because they were explaining it in a way that they understood. The next section that it talks about is planning. And you ask yourself the question, how will I design and deliver lessons that help students deepen their understanding and develop fluency in skills and processes? And the chapter also talked about how we can use elements 9, 10, and 11 to form more focused planning questions. And towards the end of the chapter, it talked about how teachers must directly teach new sets of skills. So, the world is evolving every day, and especially the education world is evolving every day, and new things are coming out. And so it's important that teachers are staying up to date on that, up to date on their research, so they are teaching the most current things, and that they're basing their lessons off of research, off of how kids in this generation learn best. The 2 strategies that I had were close monitoring and classification charts. And so close monitoring is when learning new skills, students should be closely monitored. And it gave a list of strategies you could use. And the one I chose was that to closely monitor, gradually move students from simple examples to more difficult examples, One way to do this is to have students simply imitate your actions at first and then gradually have them execute the skill, strategy, or process on their own. So my lesson plan is over food chains and food webs. And so one way that I thought that I could use close monitoring in this lesson plan was to draw out the food chain with just one element missing, and then maybe have them work on that, and then that would be more of a simple example. And then to move to a more difficult example would to have maybe 2 or 3 elements missing that they could find, that they could plug in, and then having them execute the skill. I could have them just create their own food chain, and I could have them just based off of knowledge draw out exactly what they know for the food chain. And for classification charts, I kind of drew it out, but it basically is used to group like items together based on their characteristics. So it helps students to understand the unity of characteristics between each column. And on the document, it only showed 3 columns, but it was just beneficial for me to have 4. So the categories that I did were producers, consumers, predators, and prey, because in the lesson plan, it talks about the differentiation between producers, consumers, predators, and prey. And so I thought that it would be good to have those categories and have students list characteristics for each one. And then at the end, they could just kind of summarize between each category how all of these characteristics unify and how they represent each category. So that is all I have for chapter 4. Thanks for watching.